spy isn't as glamorous as I thought. But it isn't dull.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tuesdays with Story. As always, my name is Daniel Parker. I am the writer and creator of the comic book that you just saw the trailer for, Angels Awakening. The campaign for the Angels Awakening ended last night, or early this morning, I should say. We hit our funding goal, so I want to thank everyone who has backed this comic book. It is now currently in demand, so there is still time to pick up a copy of this book if you haven't already. And joining me, as always, is my partner in crime down below me here.
Take that, everybody who ever made fun of you in high school.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey guys, it's me, Darth Bobcat, also known as DB Fastbinder. Hello everyone out there, to you wonderful people in Internet Radio Land.
Yes, and tell us about your book.
Well, this is a short story I released recently. Gotten some really nice feedback on it. People are wondering, where's the next story? And I'm going, oh no, I didn't actually plan for there to be a next story. This was this is a writing prompt, but people are asking for it. I'll have to start thinking about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of a design as a one and done pulpy story about a crew of it's kind of a border checkpoint satellite in orbit of Jupiter, who suddenly find that they aren't as alone as they thought.
Very, very cool. Yeah. So if you haven't guessed it already, what Darth Bobcat and I are saying is,
buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book!
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, buy our book.
Mine's cheaper. Get 10 of mine. All right. So,
yes.
So we've been kind of jumping around interesting topics about characterization and world building and things like that. And so today's topic is actually coming back around to characterization.
And I've been looking forward to talking about this because one of the strengths of my my own writing, I would say, is characterization and creating characters and that sort of thing. So,
yep. Now you get some interesting advice if you go looking for writing tips online, and some of them are kind of interesting. Like you'll get people who go, well, if you want to get the sense of a character and get their voice, you should write fake letters to and from them, or write a journal in the voice of the character, and you should definitely plot out every last thing about their life story, and ask yourself, what kind of movies do they like. I said, ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah.
We're working adults with jobs, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's better to keep it when you're developing your character. Try not to kind of like with world building. Don't go overboard with it.
Right, because the trouble is, let's say that you define your character. You can define your character just like a world building can paralyze you. So can characterization. If you know every single detail of a character before you get started, you could end up realizing, I have nothing to do with them anymore. I accidentally put all of their character development in the past.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and so when you do that, then you've got nothing for them to do in the future.
Yep. Now, there's a couple ways you can approach writing in general. So it's very different if your story is basically first person or third person. Because if you're doing it in sort of a first person style, and you can even have a comic book that's effectively first person if a main character is always present in all scenes, for example. I don't know. That seems like a bad idea for a comic book, but you could technically do it. Okay. I get, but I mean, like you could. You're not like so tied up in Jessica's POV that you couldn't have a scene where you cut to the villain going, my lord, we had some trouble with this break-in.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So, for example, for my Magpie Wizard series and for Second Contact, actually, I wrote first person because it comes to me more naturally. It means that I have to think of the characters differently because every character is filtered through the POV of the main character.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you can't have. It would be very hard to have a real romance between side characters because the main character would have to be there for it. Like they can find out about it, but you couldn't like have the confession unless they're hidden in a nearby closet or something.
Yeah, that would be a little weird.
Yes, and I noticed a lot of books like to cheat on this. Have you ever read Monster Hunter Inc.?
I haven't.
It's a very dumb fun book. It's about a guy who discovers that werewolves exist when his boss turns into one, and he's inducted into this group of monster hunters. They're incorporated, but he ends up. They run into this problem. How do you define a first-person main character without, if it's like a 500-year-old conquistador demon guy? How do you find out about his origin? The answer was they cheated. They gave him a psychic connection to the ghost of a rabbi who had been around back then, or had seen images of back then, and so he was able to cheat first person. The Dresden Files also like to do this, from what I read of it, where it's like Harry would get a psychic vision or something.
Right. Yeah.
I think.
Serena. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I think for our purposes, so I think for our purposes, we're going to focus on the idea of characters as if it could be third person, as if you don't have to filter them through the main character. But that's an important thing to consider, because you could, another reason not to waste your time on character Bibles that are too extensive. If you're a first person story, you're never going to find out what a character's opinion on Israel is unless it comes up in conversation with the main character.
Yes, or their opinions on or what their sexuality is, or whatever.
Right. Unless the main character is into them, it's probably not going to come up.
Right. Yeah. Serena, I'd love to help you out with that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's I kind of had the other story that I've been working on, which is the next comic book I had, and when it was still a novel, I actually had the idea where like the main character would not only be telekinetic, but he would also be telepathic. And because that book was in first person as well, and what I would do is I would have him be able to read people's minds and see into their memories. So that was kind of my cheat for
Gotcha.
Yeah, for that first person. Yeah.
Let's see. So let's kind of go through the little itinerary we wrote for ourselves.
Yes.
So has this ever happened to you? You're writing along and you hit a scene and you realize, oh, I need a character for this. Maybe the villain needs a minion who you weren't planning on, or maybe maybe there's like a guard who's standing place at a door that you didn't bother writing the character Bible for.
Yes, that's happened to me many times.
Yep, where you have like a minor bit character, you need to come up with them on the fly, and let's say that you want them to be somewhat distinctive.
Mhm.
What's kind of your go-to strategy?
With me, I usually if it's like a minion, like a henchman for the villain, what I normally do is just kind of come up with a personality for them that would be make them subservient to the main villain. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, maybe not necessarily make them like sniveling, but make them kind of like kind of give them what's the word I'm looking for? Well, yeah, it just it kind of kissing their ass in a way.
The old British toady comes to mind.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So you kind of just like go, okay, so who would be working for this evil organization?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have kind of a similar thing with some of the villains I've come up with on the fly, because in Magpie Wizard, the villains are this of the first part of the series, which I'm currently working on, are basically a group of human extremist terrorists. Kind of think like half alt-right, half Antifa.
Mm-hmm.
Just like and with a little bit of apocalyptic tone to it, where it's basically like, demons have invaded the world. The powers that be don't do enough to stop them. We, the Holy Brotherhood, guide from the shadows, and we will save the world. So it's like who would find that appealing is always kind of the thought process.
Yeah.
And like I kind of divide them into, okay, who actually believes in the message of the Holy Brotherhood, and who goes, hey, I'm a sadist. This sounds like an excuse to vent that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's that's a great way to of going about that, and it obviously, and that creates conflict as well within that group too, because you have people who are the true believers, and then you have people who are just in it because they're evil SOBs.
Yep, exactly. And I like to milk that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Now, as far as so that's part of it. Is their role in the story is going to kind of define some of their personality. Although you can kind of play against it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, excuse me. So let's say you had a story where you had the priest of a temple in a kind of pagan society. Just think off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might expect them to be kind of, speak reverently or to be kind of dignified, but you could totally just play them off as like a charlatan kind of card shark type.
Mm-hmm.
People wouldn't necessarily expect that. Or it's like hey, you want to see the God machine? I like you. Let me open the curtain.
Yeah.
Another thing I did was I had a villain who was working for one of the demons, who was just a human guy. And my first, I was like, okay, I didn't actually define this guy in advance. What would be interesting? I had it that he was from Australia, so I just kind of went, okay, Crocodile Dundee, but he's playing the fool more, and he's actually a spy master. So he gets one of the other characters drunk, she passes out, and he's talking with the main character, and suddenly he still has the verbal patterns, but he's suddenly much more serious. So
Yes.
you can even use a little bit of stereotypes in there.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing having a little bit of having some stereotype in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, So conclusion: a couple of quick ways to define a character, figure out their role in the story and in the scene. There's also a level where, unless you have it's like if you have a fight, you might need to have a few villains or heroes who aren't going to be super involved in the story. If you read a DC Crisis Event, you're not going to get the deep inner monologue of Guy Gardner. He's just going to be there because you need a Green Lantern for that particular splash page.
Yes.
And if that's the type of large-scale story you're telling, you don't necessarily have to think about it too hard. But most of us aren't in the position of writing for DC Comics, so you should probably put a little more effort in.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say in my case, I have a bunch of I have the Britannian soldiers in my comic book, and most of them don't have a whole lot of dialogue in them, and they're just kind of there for Jessica to beat up and shoot and or in some there's actually one page in there that's kind of funny, but you never see their faces. They're always wearing their helmets because they're just they're there for cannon fodder.
Right. And yep, nothing wrong with those characters. And even then you can have some fun. Like you can go as simple. You can make a memorable character just out of if you had a stormtrooper who was just kind of a scaredy cat, people will remember that guy out of the crowd. If you had a minion who is just super loyal, or is like an extreme ass kisser, even compared to the others.
Yeah, I'm remembering the one stormtrooper in The Force Awakens. I know it's Disney Star Wars, but the one stormtrooper that Finn fights in the
TR-8R.
Yeah, TR-8. Yeah. Everybody started going on about that guy. I'm like, it's a stormtrooper who uses a really cool thing.
But he has a cool thing.
Yes. Okay.
And honestly, as a stormtrooper, just lasting for more fight scene than a single blaster bolt to dispatch him made him stand out.
Yeah.
You don't need much to. So sometimes you don't need as much as you think to make a character interesting. I wonder if they ever made any. Well, I think he died in that scene, but I wonder if they have to have done a short story or a comic book about him at some point.
I think they did, yeah. And they tied it into Finn's backstory.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the ways that you can really define a character is every character, if you're writing their dialogue right, should sound different than any other character. I actually had a thing I was writing last night where I had a hard time because I wanted to have a cliffhanger dialogue bit where the reader couldn't necessarily tell which of two characters said the line. And because one problem is that one character was Kyo, the shy gamer girl who talks like she's the internet. And then you also have a villainous teacher who talks in a more refined way. It was so hard for me to come up with a turn of phrase that both of them would use.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I pulled it off in the end, but it's close enough for first draft. But
yeah.
But yeah, so the worst thing you can do is have it, and this is like a Brian Michael Bendis comic where you can swap every character's dialogue balloon, and you would not notice a difference.
Yeah. It's Yeah, it's very important, and that's probably something I'll have to. I might have to work on a little bit with my series going forward. Is giving each character a distinct way of speaking. Um, Even though they, like in Jessica's case, even though like she was an orphan and she lived on this, grew up on the streets, she still speaks very, very kind of like you would expect a young woman who grew up in North America to speak.
Man, my biggest shame is that I don't get British accents, and I have Rose, one of my characters, and she barely ever sounds British. And, and and I know why I did this. I made a conscious choice early on. I was like, okay, so I have two ways of going with this. I can either try to throw in a bunch of British slang I don't know and end up sounding like, "Hello, Soren, how's it going today? I was watching the telly last night. Oh, wait one moment. Let's get on to Laura here, and I'll tell you about it on the way to class." Yeah.
I confess, like with Sky, the water elemental. That's kind of what I did with her. I made her. Yeah, she's British, and I made her sound very British like that.
Yeah. The difference is that you've probably watched more British entertainment than I do. All of my stuff, and this really influenced Magpie Wizard, is like C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald Fraser. What's his name? The guy who wrote The Man Who Was Thursday. It's not coming to mind, but like a lot of old stuff. So a lot of my British characters sound very last century. So it's but thankfully I'm not actually doing an audiobook at this point, so it's not a big deal, or not as big a deal, but still I could do better.
Yeah.
Now one thing you can do that really helps separate characters from each other. So everybody has particular patterns in the way they speak. For example, on the Micah and the Hat Man, you could make a drinking game out of every time Micah says, "At the end of the day." Let's see. What are some other Micah isms?
Be that as it may.
Be that as it may.
Oh God, there's another one I can't remember. I can't think of it, but yeah.
But we all have stock phrases we use and things we do. So as you write, give a character a couple of those.
Yeah, you could, and it doesn't even have to be like a long phrase. It could just be like a well or sure or some kind of like filler word.
Yeah, like one character who is very refined probably wouldn't start every sentence with "well." Meanwhile, a character who was not confident in public speaking probably would stutter a lot, and you could throw that in there. That reminds me of an amusing thing. Minor side detail. I am pretty good, in my opinion. I'm not great at British accents, but I am good at giving characters distinct ways of speaking. The only really negative review I have on Goodreads is somebody gave me 3 stars out of 5, which isn't an awful review, honestly, but it's still like the most negative review I have on there.
Yeah.
And somebody took a bunch of Keogh's dialogue bits and pasted them in there as examples of questionable writing. It's like, you didn't notice that all of the dialogue that sounded kind of wooden and strange was from the shy girl who was basically raised by the internet because she games all the time. who in the book it explicitly talks about how she can't deal with people very well.
Yeah, that tells me they didn't read it very closely.
Yeah, it's just kind of amusing. It's sometimes you successfully fail.
Yeah,
but So back on topic, and that's another thing, is that your character's voice is going to say a lot about the culture they came from,
Mm-hmm.
what they do for fun, what they do for a living. If a character is a mechanic, they're going to probably use a lot of analogies, like let's say a character's an electrician. They'll probably talk more about their brain short circuiting or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and if your character's from the South, they're gonna say a lot. They're gonna be able to say a lot of y'all and you know phrases like that.
Yep. And if you know a local dialect a little bit, you can use that pretty well. Like anybody who knows a Southerner knows, if they say, "Well, bless your heart," they basically said, "F you, man, and your mother."
Yeah. or those, yeah, or they say, "Oh, bless their heart." That's they're an idiot.
Yeah. And there's also like a lot of cultural ways that people approach discussion and things that you can use to make your story more interesting, especially if you know two cultures and how they would conflict.
Right.
So, for example, because I'm anime influenced, I have a lot of Japanese characters in my book. One thing that I've noticed myself doing unconsciously, just because I've absorbed so much Japanese media, is the Japanese characters often take a while to get around to actually talk about what they want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an actual cultural trend. I heard stories about in the 80s, when Japan was was like buying up American companies or doing a lot of deals over here.
Right. Yeah.
You don't end up with these big tensions between the American and the Japanese companies doing a deal, because the American way at the time, I couldn't tell you if this is probably still true, was basically, okay, we're here to do a deal. Let's get our work done, and then let's go party hard to celebrate the deal. Meanwhile, the Japanese way was more, well, we'll play some golf and have a few drinks and have some dinner. And that's very rude of you to try to talk about business before it's business time. We're still in the feeling each other out phase.
Yeah.
So it took a while for people on both sides to kind of figure out what the difference was.
Yeah. Yeah. If you and for anyone out there watching this, if you want an example of that in a movie, watch Gung Ho with Michael Keaton. You see that a lot in that movie.
And that's actually a good thing to throw into a little bit of world building. If you're doing a fantasy story, you could totally have, okay, what's the tempo of life of this race or that race, or this culture and that culture, and how can you make a conflict out of that?
Yeah, and to bring it back to in my case, you have an empire that's made up of nobility that are all can control all the different elements. How do they interact with each other? Do they get along with each other? Hint, hint.
Yeah, right. Like, what are the manners when you know that somebody can just hit you with a fireball if you piss them off and you turn around at the wrong time?
Right, or they can turn their body into, or they could just pick up a rock and huge rock and throw them at you.
Right, exactly. It's there's a bunch of different ways you could take that.
Yeah,
and that'll influence how the characters talk.
Exactly.
Because I can see a couple different ways that could go. Either everybody is just extremely open about their emotions at all times, because everybody basically goes, I could take them in a fight if I have to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like very much like you show respect, but you're also very blunt and open, kind of like the traditional Irish Scottish way.
Oh yeah,
like the respect culture.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, you could have everybody, because they're so afraid of pissing off another elemental noble. You could write everybody to be extremely posh and respectful, but they're extremely cutthroat behind the scenes.
Yes. Yes, a very in a very Game of Thrones-esque way. Yeah.
Yep. And so that'll have a huge impact on how your characters talk.
Hmm.
And again, a lot of the fun of it is once you've figured out how character A talks and character B talks, you you can just throw them at each other. And I have characters in Magpie Wizard who I could probably sit down and write a 10-page conversation between them.
Hmm.
Just to give me a topic. It's like cooking, and like, well, one is a great baker, the other one sucks at it, and is just kind of upset that she sucks at it.
Hmm.
Or just so there's this, yeah. So yep. So a couple of little. So to kind of summarize this one, come up with little verbal tics and habits. Consider the culture,
Hmm.
and always have a bias towards making conflict.
Yes. And to add to that last point, in my case, I have, I've got Jessica, who, as I've said, she was an orphan who lived mostly on the streets. And then I have another character, Laura Stone, who's a billionaire tech mogul. And, get the two of them interacting with each other. So you have the clash of classes there that can, spur quite a bit of conflict if in that regard.
Yep, exactly. And there's a level where, like, if Jessica sounds kind of North American, it's fine as long as she sounds like kind of the right class of North American, because it translates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So next one is making all the characters complementary. So having each character complement one another.
Yep. Now, we don't mean this like, oh, you look so lovely today. Thank you. I got my hair done, and that's a lovely top.
There's no conflict in this. Boom.
Yes. Don't write that story.
Yeah.
But so what you can do instead is, by complementary, you mean characters should fill different roles in the story.
Mm-hmm. And I think we were gonna use Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as an example.
Right. I was thinking about it, like when we were talking about the topic over the weekend. I thought, let's see, what's a good, just easy to wrap your head around example of making the characters have distinct roles and different modes in the story. And for some reason, Ninja Turtles came right to mind. Because and you don't necessarily have to have these exact archetypes in your story, but they work very well as a group. Because so you got Leonardo. He's the leader. He's very serious. He often worries too much about his brothers, and his worry can actually drive conflict and cause problems. You've got Michelangelo, the goofy party animal who isn't the best fighter, and often does something goofy that gets him into trouble. Hey guys, I found this pet Triceratops. Can I bring it home?
Pizza time.
Pizza.
Yeah.
Then you've got Donatello, who is kind of the more inward-facing, nerdy one who is good at mechanical engineering. Also not the best fighter. And then you've got Raphael, who's got... So here's a question for you. When you think of Raphael, do you, even though like the four turtles are pretty much identical except for their masks, do you think of him as being shorter than everyone else?
I always... Yeah, kind of. Depending on... I guess depending on which version of the Turtles you're watching, but in the cartoon show from the 80s, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, like he's got a little bit of like a chip in his shoulder, kind of like a Joe Pesci or like a Napoleon complex type.
Right. Yeah, and it's weird because his personality in the animated show is different than it was, say, in the live action movies, because And I'm talking about the live action movies from the '90s, not the
Not the Michael Bay ones that
no, not the Michael Bay ones. No, no,
You
no.
mean the ones that don't exist? I don't know why those were canceled.
Yes, yes. I don't know which movies you're talking about. But but yeah, like in the animated series, Raphael is wise. Yeah, like you said, Joe Pesci, very wisecracking, sarcastic, and kind of a smartass. And then in the live action movies, he's more of a hothead. Like he's got a real short temper that he has a hard time keeping control of.
Right. And so you've got like a really good pattern of characters here. You've got Leonardo, who's trying to impose order on things. You've got Michelangelo, who just wants to have fun and can be irresponsible. You've got Donatello, who would probably be happier just sitting around playing with his monkey wrenches and what have you. And Raphael, who just wants to go FS up.
Yes. And I would say most of the conflict in particular is between Leonardo and Raphael. Like their personalities tend to clash more so than with the other two.
Yeah, I actually realized that, and I don't know if this was an intentional choice, but it's hilarious to me. This hit me this afternoon while I was thinking through things to talk about during the show today. So sais as a weapon are designed to catch a sword and either disarm your opponent or break the blade with a twist. Do you think that Raphael picked his weapon specifically to counter Leonardo as a dick move?
Probably.
Like that's a subtle detail that 30 years of being enmeshed in Ninja Turtles material, it just hit me today. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah. that would make it would make sense that he would choose that weapon to use just to screw with Leonardo.
Yeah, I wonder how many times they ended up having to repair their swords before Splinter told them to cut it out.
Probably quite a few.
Do you know how hard it is to forge a sword in the sewers?
Yeah. How would you do that? You'd have to. You have to.
Ventilation would be hard.
Yeah.
But and Splinter himself also is like performs a different role in that he's the mentor. He's the one that they go to when they have troubles. But he can't really be an active fighter all the time because he's kind of old and decrepit.
Right. And he's very much their father. He raised them and took care of them, taught them how to fight, etc.
Yep. And this kind of the trouble with these writing discussions and character creation discussions is that so many of them can bleed into each other. This kind of goes back into what we talked about last time, where limitations are better than powers. So, like, each of them has a distinct limitation. Splinter isn't part of the group, so they won't talk to him the same way that they would with their brothers. And he's also old and decrepit, extremely skilled, but he can only fight for like brief periods before he pulls something.
Yeah.
Michelangelo, not the best fighter, so that means that you can create extra tension, and he relies on his brothers a lot of the time, which means that you can create extra tension if you suddenly throw him behind enemy lines by himself. Donatello is kind of shy and nerdy. I think that's why they gave him a crush on April O'Neil in one of the more recent CGI cartoons, because if you do that, that's like Raphael. If you like somebody, hey, you and me, what do you think?
Yeah.
Leonardo, he'd probably be very open about it. Michelangelo, I don't even know that he would know what sex is, but that's there are some characters that you watch that you just can't imagine them actually knowing what sex is.
Yeah.
Michelangelo is on that list for me. Donatello, shy, nerdy guy.
Yeah.
You can milk a lot of episodes worth of character drama out of him working up the nerve.
Yeah. And he's and he would be relatable to the audience, to a lot of people in the audience, because I would include myself in that. Like, oh, I know exactly what that's like.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If you're watching Ninja Turtles, you probably aren't a Chad.
Yeah. And there's no shame in that.
Nope.
No.
But back away from self-flagellation there. So Raphael, he isn't the best fighter. He's very down and dirty, but like I think it's always kind of implied that whenever he and Leonardo go all out, Leo's going to win 9 times out of 10,
Mm-hmm.
which just really feeds the Joe Pesci "Am I funny to you?"
Yeah.
aspect of him, because like he just knows that he's second best, but he wants so hard to get that brass ring.
Yeah.
And Leo, like you could totally break a character like that just by putting too much pressure on him,
Mm-hmm.
because he's not going to try to share responsibilities.
Yeah. The other thing too is if you split one of them off from the group and then see what the group dynamic is like. So I remember one episode from the animated series where Leonardo leaves. I can't remember. I don't remember why he leaves, but he leaves, and the other 3 are just kind of like just completely listless. Like what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do all this without Leonardo?
Probably just complete another chaos.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
Like I'd imagine that Raph would go in, well, not guns blazing, but basically guns blazing. Donatello would probably sit back and think about it too much. Michelangelo would probably just wander off because he saw something fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't good. Yeah. The other one too. If when you talk about complementary characters, another example that I actually thought of the other day is in the original Star Trek with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
That's a great example. That's the example that I, as an adult man, should have come up with before Ninja Turtles.
That's all right.
But yeah, no, you put those 3 in just about any situation, and it practically writes itself because their responses to everything.
Yeah. I mean, Spock is going to be rational and analytical and logical because he's a Vulcan, and that's the way Vulcans are. McCoy's going to be very, driven by his emotions and just want try to just come on, Jim,
Yeah,
and
right. What, do you have ice blood in your veins?
Yeah. And then
how can you do that, Spock? It is only logical to save all 3 of us instead of one crewmate who is likely dead.
Yeah. And then Kirk would have to jump in and say, "Okay, guys, enough. This is what we're gonna do."
Girls, you're both pretty.
Yes.
But so yeah, so those 2 examples kind of dovetail to another thing, that it is way too easy, and I see a lot of writers, including writers I like, default to this. You can have the characters have different outlooks and opinions and everything without making them hate each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It tends to, especially in nowadays, where it's like you can't have 2 characters who don't who they can disagree but also still like each other, and it's
I think it's a sign of the polarized times, honestly. Where like I know a lot of people do just prefer to have friends who kind of are at least partially lockstep with them.
Mm-hmm.
But now part of what helps is that the 4 turtles, it's basically them versus the world. So at the end of the day, they're all they have for each other, even if they have to be reminded sometimes.
Yeah.
Scott, Kirk, and McCoy, all officers of Starfleet, they have their duty to do.
Right.
So part of crafting your story is, if you ever have to wonder, man, why do they put up with that character? Like, they're not required to be friends with them.
Yeah.
If you want to have that type of conflict, you got to have a compelling reason for them to continue to interact with them. There have been a lot of stories where you go, there's more people at the school than this one small group, one small clique here.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to rag on you all the time, just go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a great big world. Yeah.
Yep. And was that my computer shutting off or just my screen shutting off? Okay, good. Just my screen. I guess I didn't touch my mouse for too long.
Oh. But yeah, and going back to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, there was removing one of them from the equation. That happened a couple of times. One time it happened in the TV show The Tholian Web, where they're on the ship, the USS Defiant, which gets caught in the Tholian Web, and then Kirk's still on the ship, and then the ship like phases out, and they think he's dead, and so Spock and McCoy are just kind of basically at each other all the time, because they didn't have Kirk as a buffer between the two of them.
Right, I'd imagine they'd be at each other's throats right away.
Oh yeah, and I'm trying to remember the episode. It's been a while since I've watched it, but yeah, it was they were definitely in conflict at first, but then if I remember right, they watched like Kirk's last will and testament, and and he said something about the two of them trying to stick together and that sort of thing, and then they kind of like, mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess we have to work together and still have a friendly relationship. If nothing else, it's in honor of Kirk.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where establishing the friendship early on can be really vital to your story too.
Yeah. And it plays again later on in the movies when Spock dies in The Wrath of Khan. And of course he mind melded with McCoy before he dies. And then in Star Trek 3, Kirk's, he's got one friend dead, but he's not really dead, and he's in McCoy's head. And so it's, he's, trying to, he kind of misses that little bit of that rationality from Spock, even though, Spock's in McCoy's head, and,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. He's not there all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And also, outside of those main three, you also have a bunch of other characters that you can slot in and get different perspectives on.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the whole voice thing is you can tell when they do it wrong. I was watching this video from SF Debris a while back about Star Trek, not First Contact. What was the one? Well, maybe it was First Contact. No. What was the one where they had Kirk and Picard in the same movie and they just killed Kirk pointlessly?
Generations. That's
it. Yeah. So if you watch that first scene again, apparently the scene was originally written for McCoy and Spock to be there.
Right. Yeah.
But they bowed out, and so they were able to get Scotty and
Chekhov.
Chekhov, that's right. Thanks. Yeah. Very like Scotty and Chekhov, but they didn't actually adjust their dialogue.
Right.
And so you have Scotty talking about having a theory, and it's like, when the hell did Scotty ever talk about having a theory?
Yeah. Or Chekhov knowing anything about medicine or about being a doctor, like that's not his role. It would have taken you probably 20 minutes to reconfigure the scene a little bit, mm-hmm. to actually match the characters, but no. Yeah, I actually know a little bit about the reason why, like, Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley didn't do that, weren't in the movie, was because Nimoy didn't want to do it because it was basically just a glorified cameo, and he didn't want to come back just for a glorified cameo, even though he did it in the J.J. Abrams movies. But
He was probably older and in need of more money at that point.
yeah, that's true. So he didn't want to and he read the lines, and he's like, well, any character could read these lines. So then they gave him to Scotty, and then. Although, like what you were just saying, it's like, well, Scotty's never said stuff like that,
Right?
yeah. And then with DeForest Kelley, unfortunately, because of his advanced age and his declining health, they couldn't get insurance for him, so that's why he was in the movie. Yeah.
Yep, and that's. And that's the importance of having the voice, because like I have a bunch of characters in Magpie Wizard who I know exactly how they would say something or how they would respond to a situation.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had to swap one character out for another, you best believe that I would be completely rewriting the dialogue around it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If you make the characters interchangeable, then you haven't made them distinct, and you haven't made them unique to a given situation. So if you just can insert any character into that situation, then you're doing something wrong.
And that's where so much fan fiction annoys me. It's like I know a bunch of people who will basically that they do Ruby fan fiction, or at least they used to,
Mm-hmm.
and their takes on the characters were always just like, well, what if Jean was raised as a street thief, but with these other two characters, then he wouldn't be Jean.
Mm-hmm.
He would be some guy named Jean who would look like him, but he would have an entirely different outlook. At that point, write your own story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Darren Aronofsky's Batman that he tried to do.
I don't remember that at all.
You never heard about that? Oh God, when was that? That must have been. Oh, hey, no problem, Serena. Have a good night.
Yep. See you later.
Yeah, he had an idea. Like his idea was, instead of Bruce Wayne being a billionaire orphan, he, like, for some reason he, like, lost all the money or whatever, and then he grew up in he was actually raised by a car mechanic.
Okay, so then he's no longer Bruce Wayne.
Right. He's Bruce Wayne in name only.
Yep. Now I could see you doing a comic book like that, but like a movie is a terrible thing to waste on an Elseworlds.
Yeah. Yeah, or use another DC. What was that called? Where it was a different version of the Justice League. Like, it was a different like Kirk Langstrom was Batman.
Oh, that one. Yeah, I remember them.
Yeah.
Justice League. Let's see here.
What was that called?
See, I remember enjoying that one.
Yeah.
Let's see here. No. Anyway, it's on HBO Max. You'll find it if you go looking.
Yeah, it's the movie where General Zod cucks Jor-El.
a blunt, if accurate, way of describing the movie.
That's what happens.
Yeah, and that version of Superman lands in Mexico and is an illegal immigrant, and
right.
At least I think he was. I forget, honestly.
They're migrants. Yeah.
So and Wonder Woman was one of the new gods, but then it's like that was always the bit that just disturbed me the most. Like the other ones, like, okay, those like reasonable applications of the Elseworld.
Mm-hmm.
How does Zod cucking Jor-El results in the new gods being more evil than Darkseid and just ambushing him and killing him?
Yeah, going all red wedding on him. Yeah,
that was like I overall liked it, but that was a weird take on it.
Yeah.
like so and that's where again the characters are flimsy things where they're a collective hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to write a character, make them the character. Don't just have the new gods be evil because it fits your story.
Yeah. Don't just do it because it's because reasons. Yeah. Just, that's how we're getting most of the atrocious writing we have today.
Sometimes I feel like pitch meeting, he doesn't even have to make up the script sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, 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 wow. So the next scene, the new gods kill Darkseid. I thought the new gods were the good guys. They aren't because shut up. Okay.
Yeah. or like in Batwoman having her beating up drug addicts and then sleeping with a woman who is the manufacturer and dealer of said drug.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah.
We could talk about heroes versus villains in a future podcast. I think we can get a lot out of that.
Oh yeah.
But just because your character's name is in the title card does not make them the hero of the story. They actually have to act heroic.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. It's well, that's if they're meant to be heroes and not like an anti-hero or like a villain who's just the main character of the story, it's like if they're heroic, they need to behave in a heroic manner.
Yep, and that's another thing is there was a review of a comic book I was watching a while back where they had some sort of Batman story where they had Batman doing some sort of multiversal stuff when they were introducing the DC Omniverse, and the reviewer was like, well, wait a second, why is Batman being brought in to fight multiversal threats?
Mm-hmm.
This is a Superman story. Pitch meeting guy, because Batman makes more money. Oh, okay, I love money.
Yes. Yeah, there's a fine line between having a good story with great characters that's consistent, and then doing something just for the sake of money.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I guess our overall lesson is be Ninja Turtles, don't be Batman.
Yes. Yeah. So just to review it, what we went through. So basically, you have to define your character. You have to give them the qualities and characteristics that will help out with the story, and also create characters that will in some way complement them or complement the story. Did I get that right?
Yep,
Okay.
that works.
Yeah.
And make sure they have their own voice and ways of speaking, because that'll make them stand out more than anything else.
Right.
And I may have used this example before, but I don't care. Chris Claremont X-Men, yeah, every character had a catchphrase.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Superman, everybody had a catchphrase. Like Barry White had "Great Scott."
Yeah, Barry White.
Not Barry.
Perry
White. Well, you didn't
get enough of your love, babe.
Well, you didn't read the '70s comics where they brought him in for a while. They paid a lot for that deal when then Disco died. No.
Yeah.
Although Superman did once box Muhammad Ali, so that's
but
so it's not entirely implausible. But anyway,
but yeah.
It's they're basically you want to make sure your characters stand out on their own, and it was very very easy to fill the last quarter of this podcast with examples of creators stubbornly refusing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, you can't do it in your little story because you aren't writing for a multi-billion-dollar company who, if the story fails, that's okay. There'll still be a Batman comic next month. You get one shot to impress people.
Yeah, and you need to make it count. Yep. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for tonight. Want to thank everybody who came in and watched us talking about this, talking about characters and characterization and all that glorious stuff.
Yep. We'll be back next week with. We haven't decided yet. We don't have a formal itinerary. It could be anything.
Yes, it could be anything. It could be how do you kill your characters off?
It could be how do you respond to stalker fans?
Oh,
I don't have that problem yet, so I don't have much to say on it.
Yeah, I don't either. So I don't know how helpful we'll be about that.
Although there's this guy called Daniel who keeps retweeting what I say on Twitter. It kind of weirds me out sometimes.
yeah. I got this guy who a Darth Bobcat who's a little creepy. All right. Well, like I said, want to thank everybody for coming in and joining us. Link to Angels Awakening is in the description below, as well as to Second Contact. And if you haven't gotten that book or Darth Bobcat's other book, Confessions of the MAGPIE Wizard, that link is also in the description below too.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it was always a pleasure. And I will leave, as always, I will leave everybody with one last look at the Angels Awakening trailer. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
The life of a spy isn't as glamorous as I thought. But it isn't dull.